right. Last year at Insomniac, I led a small experimental project wherein I had an insight about the relationship between accountability and efficiency. Since it was an experiment, we tried out some new processes for us at Insomniac: design logs, developer streams, and weekly builds. Now, even though the goals of all these tools were different, they all had the same side effect. They consistently held my team accountable to different audiences of people who we very much cared about, and instead of the slog of adhering to an arbitrary deadline, the accountability made us more efficient. Basically, if you can put yourself in a consistent position of having performance pressure to a trusted audience, that anxiety can be leveraged as a tool to shape your design process and make you more efficient. I'm going to talk about how we did it with the 3 tools that I just mentioned previously. So first up, the design log was a living design doc idea lifted from an article by Spry Fox designer Dan Cook. It's a near-daily log of play notes, issues, and experiments that anyone can read and comment on, sort of a critical analysis of what is working in the prototype and why. Now, I decided to use the design log as a method for my solo prototyping phase. Its original purpose was to communicate how the prototyping was coming along to my leads and was supposed to be an afterthought to my work, but instead, the act of keeping the log started shaping my design process. Basically, knowing I would have to write one of these entries each day for the company leads to read started creating performance pressure. Pressure to address previous play notes, test hypotheses written in my analysis, and show that the rapid experimental nature of prototyping still counted as progress. It made me design with the intent of justifying the trying of new things. Showing near daily progress and having to critically articulate what was working and failing to people that I cared about pushed me to be more focused on rapid, provable experimentation. Now, one might think, Lisa, these design logs took a lot of time to write up. Would that time not have been better spent just prototyping more? And I don't think so. I think the work spent writing the logs made a productive loop that yielded more progress over time and kept me from wandering too much on the prototyping phase. So next tool is developer streams. But now we're in production, and my team has decided to live stream ourselves working on the game once a week to an audience on Twitch. The design logs were more academic in source, but the inspiration to do dev streams came straight from the indies. Thank you, indies. The original purpose behind streaming was outward-facing, to experiment with format, foster a community around the game, and straight up educate our fans from the inner workings of game development. But after a few weeks of streaming, I noticed something starting to happen with how my team was working. The team had become acutely aware that we would be showing our unfinished, in-progress work to the public every week. All of a sudden, we were on point for how efficiently we used our time. We started scheduling in such a way that emphasized visible progress and held to that all throughout production. Design-wise, I became more efficient at tuning. Camera work, which I could have tuned for a week straight, had to get to a certain threshold of okay before temporarily shifting to something more watchable for the stream. This break cycle kept me from getting slogged down with tuning nitpicks and yielded more insights in general. The streams were a fair amount of work to wrangle, but like the design logs, I'm confident the extra work yielded more efficient results over time. We didn't have any other demoralizing lulls that can happen in production, and I'm certain that's because of our accountability to show progress to our stream audience. So, end of project time. Time for weekly builds. So the logs were academic, the dev streamings came from the indies, but the itemized weekly build checklist was straight up AAA, lifted from a process used on Sunset Overdrive that I wanted to experiment with on a small scale project. So, scheduled with hyper-specific checklists for each build, the original purpose was to create intermittent milestones leading up to the end of the project, while still making room to implement feedback, rather than a single looming deadline and the oh shit moment of being completely overwhelmed the week before it hits. Knowing that these builds would be reviewed each week by people that I trusted very much made me efficient at closing design loops. It's easy to think there's plenty of time at the end to iterate on polish, but having itemized lists out to the final deadline adjusted for whatever didn't make it into this week's build makes you hit this is good enough really fast. So the reason accountability is important here instead of just arbitrary weekly deadlines is that you're still forced to leave open time to assimilate feedback every week. This makes you commit to your final design decisions, so you won't waste time negotiating a suggestion when you know the answer is no. So the end of project push seems like the last place where you would want to spend a huge chunk of time responding to feedback, perhaps trying to figure out how to explain to your lead suggestion that it is out of scope, but at this stage, losing that time makes you decisive and confident in your design calls. So the biggest thing I want you to take away here is that these tools only worked because they made us accountable to people that we cared about. We were not doing these consistent deliverables because we were forced to by an arbitrary policy rule, but because we valued our audience's judgment and cared that they stay updated. We were more motivated to show them progress and to not waste their time. There's a big difference between that and having to write an update every week because your boss told you to. So accountability alone is not what will make you efficient, but rather who you hold yourself accountable to and why you even care about them.